Now, the broadcaster Aasmah Mir has written a moving memoir about growing up in Glasgow in the 1970s and 80s. She describes the racist bullying she experienced at school and the challenges that came from living between two different cultures. She sat down with me in Kelvingrove Park to discuss A Pebble in the Throat. Aasmah, thank you so much for joining us on Scotland Tonight.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the book. Tell me, what drove you to write it?
You know, that is, a lot of people have asked me that question and I don't actually know the answer to that. I think that had something to do with the fact that you get to the age of 50 and you become more reflective about your life. And a lot of people come up to me and say, oh, you do this on the radio and you're very talkative and you're very confident. And I just kind of wanted to say to people that it wasn't always like that, you know, it wasn't always like that. There were some dark times. There was a time when I almost lost my voice. I couldn't speak anymore. I couldn't really interact with other human beings because I found it really, my confidence was knocked, and I couldn't famously go into a shop to buy anything like a magazine or a chocolate bar, and I used to have to send my mum. And I suppose I just wanted to make people understand that, you know, everything is not as it seems almost, you know, that you can present as a very confident person. And I believe I am a very confident person now, but, you know, it was quite a long way to get here.
You know, and I wondered reading it how difficult it was to revisit some of those times, because it sounded really miserable, especially was a
You're
couple
really
of
selling it.
Well, no, I mean just what you went through. My heart kind of broke for you, but yeah. Let me just see, there was a bit where you say, at school everyone has white skin and some of them don't want to touch me because I'm brown. My voice cracks as I realise I can't pretend it isn't true anymore. Tears fall onto the cloth. And you know, was it sad kind of dredging up those memories?
I suppose it was in a way, because it's something you've kind of forgotten about, or you've put it in a little box somewhere and you've forgotten about it. And one of the reasons you've forgotten about it is because things are so much better now. I mean, they are, you know, a million times better. And this was a long time ago, and some people will say, why dredge it up? But sometimes it's good to dredge stuff up, not just personally, but also to mark how far we've come. You know, that this stuff used to happen, and actually a lot of people are quite surprised. Maybe they didn't know, maybe they've forgotten. And I think it's quite useful to do that, really, to say, well, things are different now.
And it shows it must have been hard to grow up between two worlds.
Yeah, I mean, so I wasn't mixed race or dual heritage, but I felt it, really. I always felt that way when I was growing up. I felt like I wasn't this and I wasn't that. I wasn't Scottish and white because I had brown skin, and because my parents were from Pakistan, and you know, we did things differently, and I suppose we looked different. And I wasn't Pakistani enough because I didn't know the language. My parents never really taught me it, and I didn't like wearing the clothes because they felt uncomfortable on me. So I was basically a kind of disappointment on both sides. So I was kind of in the middle, and I always felt like I was dual heritage, even though I wasn't. My parents are both Pakistani, but you know, I was born and brought up in Glasgow, just outside Glasgow. So it was always just that kind of straddling these two things and always feeling you were about to tip over.
And why did you decide to interweave your mother's story through the book?
So my mum, I always wanted to write the book, and I always thought it would just be an interesting memoir to write, and there's a lot of stuff that was kind of unresolved. But I thought it was quite a linear, kind of quite stock thing to do, you know, just one story. So I was talking to my mum one day about stuff, and I was saying, you know, Mum, you never really understood what it was like because you had an amazing childhood, you grew up in Pakistan with people who looked like you. And she said, well, let me tell you about my childhood. And she started telling me all the stuff that I never knew, that she'd never told me. And I won't spoil it, but it's about the house that she grew up in and how it was very challenging circumstances in terms of who lived in the house. She started telling me all this stuff, and then it just, like, you know, one story after another, and I thought, this is amazing. Like, why have you never told me this? But that generation don't. They just don't think it's worth discussing. So I thought, well, that's really worth something, and that's why I decided to put them in. And also, she was born Pakistan, I was born in Glasgow. She came over to Glasgow, I went over to Pakistan, and we kind of like pass in the book, even though we obviously wouldn't, you know, chronologically. And I just thought it was an interesting way of doing it.
And was it a nice experience doing that with your mum? I mean, how did she do it? Did she send you notes, or how did you work with her on it?
So it was really weird because it was a kind of tail end of lockdown, so I couldn't really come up and visit her. So it was on the phone. And my mum's hearing is not wonderful anymore. Obviously, she's getting on a bit. And so it was quite challenging on the phone, but we were on the phone for like hours, 2 notebooks worth of notes. I would ask her about stuff and she would tell me, and I'd be like, but Mum, what were they wearing? Did they have a moustache or not? Why can't you remember? You know, how were you feeling about that? And so often she hadn't considered how she was feeling until now.
You've got a young daughter yourself now. How important do you think it's been for you to write you and your mum's story for her to have a record of?
So that's a great reason, really, straight away, the idea that, you know, she will have some understanding when she grows up of her great-grandmother, her grandmother and me. So that's a fabulous kind of gift, I suppose, to give any child. And there was some coverage of it in a newspaper, and it said, you know, growing up with racism in the 1980s, and she looked at the picture and she said to me, "What's racism?" And I had to kind of explain, although I didn't want to explain it to her because she's just like, that makes no sense. Why would that happen? So the fact that she didn't know what racism was, and even when I explained to her, she didn't really understand what it was, means that she's not experienced it, which is fabulous. I mean, she's only 7 and things may change, but I don't think so. You know, I don't think that we are that kind of society anymore. I think, you know, it's 2023, it's not 1983, thank goodness. And I just think people are so much more open-hearted and open-minded than they were back then.
What about in Glasgow? Do you think the situation's improved here?
I think it must have improved. It's difficult for me to say because I don't live here. So what I'm doing is a kind of snapshot that I get whenever I come here. But what I noticed is that when I was growing up, I was basically I felt like I was the only person. And perhaps where I was in my school, I was the only one. And in my primary school, I was the only one. And where we lived, I was the only one. But and every time I see all the different nationalities, I kind of think, oh, to grow up in Glasgow now, as opposed to in the 70s and the 80s, it must be a dream. I mean, it must be. But then I'm comparing it to what it was like back then. I would love to grow up in Glasgow now.
In practical terms, where did you find the time to write your book? Because you present Times Radio Breakfast, you have to get up at 3 o'clock, you're a newly single mum to 7, she's 7?
She's 7.
I mean, where did you find the time? You must have been exhausted.
It was horrible. It was horrible. I have to say it was really, really bad because I was supposed to start the book in March, and then everything kind of fell apart in terms of my marriage in March. So then I had to work from home. So I had to present the programme from an ironing board, a computer on an ironing board in my bedroom while my daughter slept next door. And you know what? She never woke up and came in while I was in the middle of interviewing a government minister. And that was always my fear. Yeah. She never did. She put a couple of notes under the door saying, can I come in now and can I have porridge or, you know, whatever. So it was really difficult. It was really difficult in terms of time. I had about 2 to 3 hours in the middle of the day where I could do it because I don't have the evenings because I'm in bed at 8:30.
So we're in Glasgow today, and you started your career at STV.
I know.
Do you have fond memories of that? I think we might root out some archives. Sorry,
no, please do. I don't see enough of it.
Hello, I'm Viv Lumsden.
I'm Aasmah Mir, and this is Scotland Today. The counterfeiters behind the fake teabag scam have dumped 100,000 fake teabag boxes on waste ground in Glasgow. Trading standards officials say they're running scared after their lucrative trade was exposed. And that's it for now. The next news headlines are at 10:30.
We are back as usual on Monday. Have a very good evening and enjoy your weekend. Good night.
Good night.
I have such fond memories. I'm still in touch with people from STV, and what a great first job. I mean, people still don't believe me when I say, what was your first job? Oh, I was working for STV and I ended up reading the news. You know, this girl who couldn't speak to people, who didn't want to go out of her room, who didn't want to speak to anyone, you know, kind of ending up by default on TV and then going off and doing other stuff. It was an amazing boost to my confidence, you know, and I still I could wish we could get those days back actually, because they were the glory years. They really were. They were the glory years.
Aasmah Mir, thank you so much for joining us in
Thank you.
Scotland tonight. Thank you.